Hey everybody, it's Mark Hanna, Hothead Thundermouth, the original Hothead Thundermouth. I mean, after all, who else would call themselves that? Bit crazy, isn't it? Anyway, so this is the first in a series, I think, of 4 videos. I'm calling them Fixing ASL. This is ASL. This is number 1, Fixing Skulking. I want to talk about skulking. I'm going to go over some possible solutions to skulking. Why is skulking used? Why people don't like it in the game. Um, there's apologists that say, "Oh, it's just part of the game. Play the game." Sure, yeah, I can play the game with skulking. It's arguably designed for effect. Idea of hiding in the hex so far back in the hex that you can't be seen, as if you're on the other side of the hex. Sure, it's okay, but it doesn't. It's not satisfying because you actually have to leave the hex, hide behind things. It gives you a lot more flexibility than you would normally have if you just hunkered down or adjusted your cover, made yourself harder to see because you're under fire or under the threat of fire, and you take more care about things. I think that's what would happen. I don't think that skulking, as it's played in the game, and I'll talk about that, actually represents squad play. So, when I talk about fixing ASL, we're talking about fixing it so it actually plays like a squad level tactical game. So that's where I'm coming from. You may or may not like this. That's okay. Once again, it's Mark Hanna, Hothead Thundermouth. Okay. Unscripted, uncensored, unapologetic, and psychologically immune from social media control. Let's get started. Now, what I'm going to do is show you some definitions and some solutions, and then after this, I've got a sample game in the jungle where skulking is a prominent feature of sneaking around to set up your positions and traps and things like that, um, and also to avoid getting blasted by flamethrowers and things like that. Okay, so let's take a look at this and see where we're at. So first of all, uh, I want to show you here this definition of skulking. What is it? So it's when a stack of infantry, normally by assault move, but they could actually move if they wanted to, with the idea that other units nearby would then advance into the hex after they left it. So what you're doing is you're vacating infantry personnel. Skulking isn't appropriate for vehicles because there's no advance phase for vehicles. If you move a vehicle and move it out of the LOS, it stays out of the LOS. There's no skulking problem with vehicles, as far as I can tell. All right. So you move the stack of infantry or dummies, whatever. You vacate the hex. You move away from the location. And we have to kind of pin this down because sometimes you're going to be doing some, quote, skulking, but there's no danger around. So that's not skulking. Skulking is about avoiding danger. Okay, so that's what we are talking about here. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick sound check here just to make sure I haven't started off this video with some silly error. Okay, so hold on. I'll be back. Okay, back. I've checked the sound. Everything's fine. Okay, so skulking, what is it? Let me read this to you, although I'm sure you can read just fine. You take a stack of infantry, you vacate a hex by moving away from the location that's within the LOS and normal range of a known personnel enemy unit that could be obtain an NMC in a hypothetical prep fire phase or in the IFT or with a final hypothetical 2-hit number of 7 or less using HE or WP. So that's actually separate from the first condition, which is a personnel unit. The second condition, which I'll probably have to clarify this, is if you're using ordnance. Okay, so got to get a tank close enough to do a 2-hit number of less than 7. It can't be in movement, but obviously if you're thinking about moving and it's your prep fire phase and there's a tank sitting away from you 6 hexes away and you're in a building, or whatever terrain you're in, the final to hit number is going to be an 8. So that's good enough uh, for you to go ahead and skulk. Because you don't want to take that shot. Maybe it's a 5 to hit if you're in a stone building and he's CE, or -1 acquisition is normal. 27% chance of taking the 75 or 100 millimeter shell is somewhat dangerous. You might skulk. I think most people would. So I'm trying to figure out situations where people would be tempted to skulk. Okay, if the guys are 25 hexes away and they're shelling you, and you're worried about that, you still might skulk out and then skulk back in because area fire cannot track you. So a lot of games are played, which normally wouldn't be played. I don't think, oh yeah, look, oh, they're indirectly firing at us. Let's move out of the fire, make them track us over here, and then move back in where we were. Most soldiers, I think, would consider that unnecessarily dangerous. Instead, they would probably dig in where they are, cover their heads with their helmets, get some wood around them, dig and scratch into the ground, improve the cover where they are, not try to get up and move to another place to get that fire to track you and then move back in. This is what we don't like about skulking. Okay, it's an artificial construct to represent hunkering down. So that's what skulking is. Um, why is it used? To avoid getting fired at during the defensive fire phase, by moving out of the LOS of an enemy threat and then advancing back in during the advancing fire phase. No, during the advance phase. Obviously, you need to edit this thing. During the advance phase to reoccupy the hex that was just left. Known as a gamey tactic with very poor verisimilitude. I've already described why that's a poor representation of combat. As advanced squad, we got a lot of rules here. All right, why not get these rules a little bit better? Okay, now, do I really think that the powers that be, who with a vested interest since 1987, trying to manage this monstrous rule book? I mean, in all fairness, this particular rule that I'm proposing probably has some ramifications along the neural network for a variety of rules. And this is why this kind of a major change isn't usually implemented. It would just change too many rules. It would change the balance. It would change the strategies used because everybody skulks the hell out of their units as much as they can. People get outraged by it, or people just shrug their shoulders and smirk at the outraged people. I'm sure I was one of the former before I was one of the latter. Fine. Okay, let's fix it, though. Let's suggest a fix. Okay, so I have two alternatives. Well, there's actually one alternative, one way to fix it with two ways to go about handling your units. The first way is by marking the hex as vacated. Let's say you take your units, all the units leave, any non-hip infantry entirely vacating the hex. Looks like I've got a redundancy in here, so I need to improve these rules, but that's fine. I'm looking for suggestions here. Reasonable suggestions. If you can actually come in and make some comments for improvement, great. Okay, I'm sure that the easiest place for this to be used is going to be in solitaire ASL because this is an experimental proving ground for a lot of different things that you can do. All right, so anyway, you have to leave the move behind a skulk counter, and when I have a play test here, I'm using, I think, yellow round little wooden tablet things that represent that this is a skulked vacated hex. All right, when you have such a hex marked, or location really, no infantry unit can now enter that location using assault movement or in the advance phase. If you want to run into the location, if you actually needed to replace those guys and you needed to get those other guys out, move them in first, okay, and then move the other guys out. So if you can assault move in, get those guys in before you skulk the other guys out. Or if you have to skulk those guys and you need to run in, you can do that. You can use regular movement to do that. You can't use the advance phase. You can't come up behind and advance in because the defense has been vacated. The idea was that the defenders abandoned it. Okay, they decided not to make a stand. You remove the skulk counters at the end of the close combat phase. All right. Then the alternative for those units, okay, whoops, let me get that out. Alternatively, at the beginning of a unit's movement phase, you can put a hunker down marker. I used a white tablet. The hunker down marker, and this is a preliminary idea, you don't prep fire the unit. Normally you're going to be concealed here because usually there's no reason to do this. I mean, if you're going to be unconcealed, you might want to try to hang out and not prep fire, but if you're going to see enemies coming at you and you can see them, they're known, you want to stick around, you're probably going to shoot at them. So normally you're probably going to be concealed. So anyway, you hunker down. You cannot be subject to first fire during this process. During final fire, the enemy can shoot at you, but they get an extra +2 hindrance DRM to any attack versus units or even dummies in that location. So if you're in a stone building, the total HTTM is +5 now because you've hunkered down. You haven't fired out. You're not next to the windows shooting out. You're hunkered down just like I disappeared. An extra +2 to seeing the video presenter. Okay. So the defending unit is giving up the chance to fire or move by hunkering down in the location. This is what skulking is intended to represent. And this represents slight adjustments to improve the cover, hiding behind windows, getting behind pillars, doing things to make it much harder for you to get hit. All right. Makes the enemy fire more difficult, and you maintain control of the location. You remove the hunker down markers at the end of the defensive fire phase. All right. So the next part of this video, which I will insert, is going to be about how I tried to do this in a jungle scenario with some Japanese. Now, the Japanese are a bit unusual because they may not want to skulk as much as other nationalities because they can advance in and do some damage in close combat. But the principle is the same. And it's also interesting because in this scenario, you'll see there's a trench line. And one of the problems with trenches and foxholes is you can't skulk. So everybody's like, why should I ever use foxholes? I'm not allowed to skulk. The issue isn't about skulking. The issue is about using the foxholes as they're intended to hunker down in there, to take fire and then pop your heads back up, not to skulk into the woods hex behind you and then get back into the foxhole. I just played a scenario, or am playing a scenario, that they tried to fix this in the whatchamacallit module, the cities module, the one that just came out, where they have an SSR for, I think, just this scenario, that if you assault move from a foxhole, you get to pretend that the move out of the foxhole was actually in the hex you assault moved to. That's one way to fix it. That's a sort of a way to fix it. But that rule is intended to preserve skulking, not to fix it. All right, so, but again, that's a lot easier to deal with in a scenario that keeps the main rules all the same. This is changing how things is done. So let me switch this over now. Thanks for listening. I'm going to put the sample videos on now, and then I'll come back to tell you what's next after this. Okay, here we go. Thank you.
So, hi folks, we're doing this test of a scenario called Broken Bamboo. I just want to try some ideas I've got for anti-skulking. Ways to prevent the skulking tactic. And, it's kind of built into ASL, so it might be a little bit hard to justify how we're going to do that. But this is a perfect place for skulking in the jungle here. You can see some Japanese are set up here. There's some hidden trenches and things. I've just marked them on the map just for my own memory. And the British are coming in over here. There's actually a stack way up here. I don't know if you can see it. And I am going to send somebody across these rice paddies here. That was kind of a random roll. Usually what I do when I do these setups is for the attacker, 1 or a 2, this flank, center, 3, 4, 5, 6, this flank. I rolled a 1 with the Gurkhas. So the Gurkhas are coming in. They basically need to take this village. So you can see this terrain here is set up, for possible skulking as we go forward here for either side. So I'm trying to figure out a way to stop the skulk. And this probably won't be well received by the community. The conservative, well, when I say conservative, I mean not politically conservative, but concerned with preserving the integrity of the 10,000 scenarios they already have. And of course, this can't possibly be tested on all those scenarios. But I just wanted to see the possible effects. So you see I've got some colored markers here. These colored markers we'll use for 2 purposes rather than making new markers. The yellow marker will represent if somebody has moved out of a hex. Whether they're skulking or not, it's going to be marked as exited. Which means with the anti-skulking rules, you cannot advance or assault move into that hex. Okay, now this does not apply unless there's a known enemy unit within normal range. So if there's a 628 here, Gurkha or something, 2 hexes away, and I better skulk. Well, you've just marked this hex as skulked, which means nobody's going to be able to move in the advance phase, so you better hang on. Well, the whole idea behind skulking is it's supposed to, which is really annoying, it's supposed to represent units moving to the back here and then shuffling back, moving to the back, shuffling back. This isn't something that really happened. Oh, it's their fire phase, Sergeant. Right. Everybody scooch 10 meters to the back in the hex. This isn't what happened, but they might hunker down. So the white ones are for people who say, okay, I am not going to skulk, but I'm concealed, and I'm going to put a protection marker. I'm going to call it something like that. And what this does is, as long as they stay concealed, when they put this marker on, they're going to get an extra +2 DRM for fire versus that hex. So, used to have an 8 + 1, now it's an 8 + 3. But they're protecting the hex, which is what they're supposed to be doing. So, that works for buildings, woods, any place that you're trying to get out of a frontline hex and avoid getting shot at by somebody. So I'll have to try to playtest these. I have to say, well, let's say there was a 628 here that had a line of sight to here. Would that be skulking? Probably not. I would think that in this particular case, since it can take fire from a different known enemy unit in normal range, that is not a skulk move, and you would not put a skulk marker. So these are just some of my thoughts. So I'm going to play through this scenario, get it to that stage where there's a possible skulk, and we'll take a look at those effects. I'm not going to show you all of the scenario up till that point, because this isn't really a playthrough of Broken Bamboo. It looks like a pretty good scenario, though. The British have 7 turns to get all the way across to here. However, all of these water things are considered dry. I think that might even be true for the swamps. All water obstacles are dry, and that will turn marshes to mud flats, I think. But these are swamps, so I have to make sure what happens to them. So I'll check all of that out. I'll play this scenario, and then we'll get into a skulking situation. and see what happens. All right? Okay. All right, so it's the first Japanese turn and the first opportunity for skulking. So let's look at this. None of the British are known, so skulking rules do not apply. This guy can assault move back to here, and he is not visible, although actually he's going to be seen by that. It might be worse. But he'll do that. So that's an assault move. And do I want to shoot at that? That's very tempting, but it's going to reveal the location of my flamethrowers a little prematurely. So now I won't take that shot. You can see here, when you have I already assault moved this guy back from here. That's not skulking either. There's no known units. When you have a trench line like this, there's you get kind of an advantage because they can't see the trenches, at least if you're fighting in the Pacific. But if there's a skulking opportunity, you can play, no, I am not skulking. Put one of those markers on that I put. Here I've got them, they're just round little pills. And you get an extra +2 and +2 for the trench. So it really does encourage you not to skulk. It's more realistic that way. The only thing I'm concerned about is with this skulking rule, you do lose some flexibility as the defender, because if you decide to stay in the front line, before you could assault move back, and then maybe you could say, you know what, I want to leave the area entirely and go back, or you could go back up front. So the skulking gave some privileges that you don't always have. Okay, so anyway, that's it for their move. I have to decide if I'm going to move these reserves, but that's not related to the skulking issue. Okay, so coming up on Japanese turn 2 now, we have some skulking possibilities we need to consider. There's some known enemy units now in range of these guys. This guy got torched by a 9-2 flat attack at 8-0, rolled a 2. Unfortunate, these things happen. I just hate it when it happens to me. But anyway, so let's look at the skulking possibilities. This is where it gets interesting, because normally to leave a trench, you really can't skulk. But he doesn't know about this trench. I can put a hunker down marker here, a hunker down marker here. Can't do it on hip units, let's say, so I'll have to make a rule for that. I can put a hunker down marker here, and even on this, although Fox, perhaps you shouldn't be eligible for that. He's not actually in the terrain. Okay, so those are the possible hunker down markers if I don't fire. Now, if I do fire, then this happens in the movement phase, so this couldn't be done. Okay, so looking at these Japanese situation here, this is a real unit. I can take either a 4+1 and get whatever the hell's in their back, or I can hunker down and get half firepower +4. So I think this is a hunker down situation. If this were a building, many players would just scooch back out, be immune to possible fire, and then scooch back in. But you can't do that now, because if I did do that, I'd be putting a vacate marker on the hex, and I wouldn't be able to enter it in the advance phase or by regular movement, or by assault movement. So you do lose some flexibility as a defender. Anyway, I don't have to put those markers on now, but this one's probably going to wind up leaving. So, although I want to check this LOS here, I can't tell. Let me just at least eyeball it. I think it's going to cross some green, so he won't be able to see me there. So yeah, I'm going to do a hunker down marker here. Okay. um, and figure out what to do. I don't, again, this is the prep fire phase, so I wouldn't do that yet. Okay. He's approaching my hip here, so I should be able to whack him when he gets into that hex. All right, let me pause the tape and do the... Okay, so the Japanese have hunkered down. Now, this is a tough one here. Now, even flamethrowers get the hunker down modifier. It's kind of like a hindrance modifier. So, and they don't want them to jump out and ambush them, so they're going to have to shoot here. So we'll do the 9-2-4 flat first. Rolled an 11, so that's no good. So, yeah, in both situations, we don't want anybody to attack us. So, let's do the flamethrower first. 12 flat. 12 plus 2, actually. 12 plus 2. 6, 7, 8, 9. So, he was able to... Marker comes off. These dummies come off. But it caused a bit of a fright. Now these guys are shooting at the hunker down marker. I'll declare, of course, that there's a trench in there just to speed things up. Okay. So there's a trench. It's going to be a +4. Actually, I've got... Okay, there it is. 8, 16... No, 12, up 3. And it's a real unit, so they'll lose concealment. 12 up 3, rolled a 1 check. And a 4 passes. Okay. So that was okay for them. Any other shots? Let's see. I got this guy, but I don't want to shoot him through there. Him? No. Okay, so it's the Japanese turn. So, do I want to go in here and maybe get lucky on a CC? I think I do. I need to try to take them out. My trench line is ruined anyway. Over here, he'll come up. They'll come up. So they'll be CX'd. CX markers up here and here. And then I can't go back in here. So that's just what I wanted to illustrate. No advance into that hex. Well, it was an exciting close combat as the Japanese came in. There was no ambush, but they could roll the snake eyes for their attack. They're attacking first, so they get to exfiltrate, and everything died in there. So it was looking bad for them. Now they're going to need to be rooted out from this hex, and they've lost 2 squads. So that was a devastating blow for the Gurkhas. Okay, so far, so good. Finding a couple things on how to handle this skulking thing, but seems to be working okay so far.
Okay, so the sample video, I didn't go through the whole scenario. It's actually quite fun, but I played a little bit more, but there was no skulking that came up because the Japanese were just starting to tear up the poor Gurkhas. I'm not so sure the Gurkhas could win that scenario. So, but the illustration of how the skulking could work and the effects of trenches, the effects of the Japanese were shown. Pillboxes can't skulk. They're just known to be pillboxes. So, you know, it's just like units that are in pillboxes can be put under a question mark counter, but that doesn't affect any effectiveness of the fire at the pillbox. So no skulking, hunkering down in pillboxes. You're already hunkered, so to speak. Okay, so that's the general approach I would take with that kind of fix. I think it's workable. I invite anybody to make comments about this. I do think it will make it harder to defend in some ways, part of the problem with modern ASL, which I'm going to get into later, is the advent and particular use of some tactics due to the design that make it easier for the attacker to infiltrate, restrictions on defensive fire due to positioning. One of those factors is, for example, let's move up a half squad in assault movement, and if it gets shot at, then the guy that's next to it, if it doesn't destroy the half squad, can't shoot past the half squad. The one hex range limits its defensive subsequent first fire abilities. If you don't shoot at the half squad, then it's dangerously close to your line and can come in and, uh, close combat you or whatever. So these kinds of methods that are used by really good players to sort of disintegrate the defense by minimizing the ability for defensive first fire options to be used helps the attacker. The other one that helps the attacker is VBM freeze by staying in motion, doing cheesy things like it did in my last game with Doug. Um, it is cheesy. I took a honey tank, well, it's called an M3, I guess, or an M4 maybe. I forget. It was an American tank, not a British one, so it wasn't being called a Stuart. But I ran into the hex in bypass movement and then popped my top and went CE so that the units upstairs would be forced to do triple point blank fire on my unit. Okay. Um, in reality, this was not a real tactic used by tankers. I mean, they might try to draw fire, but they wouldn't try to go in next to the unit, whizzing by in motion, popping up their CE tank and saying, "Hey guys, shoot at us." Oh, you don't want to shoot at us? You can't shoot at anybody else. And this is how the game is played. This is not my idea of squad leader battle. I don't care. Okay. VBM freeze is bad enough. VBM freeze of units that are on the second level or first level of a building by doing something cheesy like that is even worse. Okay. So, but that's how the game is played. Okay. And that's how all the scenarios have been designed. Okay. And that's why the balance of all the scenarios, the thousands of scenarios, would be affected if they actually tried to fix it. That's the way it is. There's no question about it. Okay. So, but let's try to fix it anyway. So, here's some other things that I want to talk about fixing. The first one will be vehicle bypass movement. How to deal with this notion of tanks coming in to a hex in a sideways oblique motion manner to effectively deal with infantry so your other infantry can run up behind it. And there's all sorts of articles on strategy about this. Oh, you need to fire and spray fire to put residual firepower factors out there, so that your unit's firepower doesn't get wasted because you've been VBM frozen. However, how realistic is that? Is that what they actually did in World War II? Oh, look, here comes a tank. It's going to VBM freeze us. Before it can do that, let's fire at the tank as it moves in and spray fire to leave residual firepower. Okay, boss. Good idea, boss. Um, let's waste all of our firepower. We don't even know if infantry is going to be running at us, but let's just use residual firepower just in case. So that's how the game is played. Well, come on. Okay, I don't like it. A lot of people don't like it. Um, I was playing one scenario where that's all I was doing to a guy, VBM freezing his squads, then running up my other squads. We both got sick of it. We weren't happy about it. So I think I could have won the scenario. I didn't even enjoy myself enough to want to continue to play it. It just felt so gamey to do that. Now, a lot of times you don't have that opportunity and that many tanks to waste on VBM freeze, But, there's certain nations that don't have the LATW capability. For example, Russians are particularly vulnerable to this tactic. They just don't have the HTTM stuff. They might have a demo charge here and there that they could throw. Uh, that's possible. But the cure for VBM freeze is, first of all, to fix that rule. And actually, I don't have to fix that. That was fixed in the Dinant historical ASL as an SSR. Very elegantly done. I need to buy that guy a cigar who did that, a bottle of whiskey, something. Whichever designer came up with that rule in Dinant that prevented VBM freeze except for very specific circumstances, was one of the most creative and elegant and simple ways to deal with it that I've ever seen. Of course, what it does, though, is take out the possibility of actually ever doing VBM freeze on purpose, but it's the easiest way to fix the rules without having to rewrite the entire set of rules about VBM, is just simply to not allow it. Well, I also have a proposal that I'm going to talk about next time called Vehicle Point Blank Assault. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who's read about those accounts in Battle of the Bulge, where at the St. Edward Sanatorium, a Panther tank came up, drove up, stuck its snout through the window, and fired point blank range right into the building. Okay. With its front facing the building. So it's here, the window's here, blam, blam. That's not something that you do in ASL for a couple of reasons. First of all, is the extra +2 for fire within a hex. The other reason is the serious danger that you face from ambush, street fighting. Okay. Um, but there's accounts of this happening all the time. Uh, Certainly more than the accounts of using VBM freeze in World War II, which I have never read a single account of how the tactic was used. Now, if you guys have a tactic out there that you have read about where this was something that was used, that you drive up real fast with your half track, zip on by to make sure the guys can only fire at you and then wait for the infantry to come up. If there are actual battle reports that say that this is exactly what happened, then fine. I'm happy to take those into consideration. However, in my experience of reading a lot of World War II, and I am by no means a scholar, but I've never heard of that. I've never heard that that's how the game is played, or that's how real life was. Now, the game is supposed to simulate real life, and you can make all the hand waving arguments you want about design for effect. This isn't designed for effect. This was, we never actually really figured this out very well, but to keep it consistent with the current rules, this is how we're going to handle it. And it's one of those generational things that sprouted itself along, so to speak. Okay. Finally, this last one is a new one on my list. It's called The Plethora of Half Squad's Yuckiness. And I'm starting to see more and more players who think they're brilliant because of this idea of let's divide up all of our squads into half squads, and then run them up at the enemy to, you know, overwhelm them, or to make them annoying targets, or to get next to units and then make them not be able to fire at bigger stacks behind them. All of these annoying and really actually stupid tactics, as far as I'm concerned. Look at this quote that I found. I just did a little research on this. It wasn't until 1956 in the U.S. Army that the Rifle Squad was really reorganized into 11-man organization with a sergeant as a squad leader with 2 5-man fire teams. That would be a sergeant and 2 half squads. 1956. Not 1937, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, or 45, or even in Korea. The basic unit of attack was the squad. Yet, time after time again, I see players, okay, because it's smart and cheap and it seems clever, Okay, they go ahead and they deploy as many half squads as they can. Then they're rolling task checks, task check, task check, task check, to deploy until they have half their army is half squads running around. Well, I'm calling BS on this. This is not how the game. This is not half squad leader. Okay, this is called squad leader, and primarily you should be using squads for stuff. Okay, I agree with the 10% deployment for special operations. You'd probably have some of your force trained to act as teams. In a modern army today, they are trained to act in teams of 4, cover 2 by 2, whatever you want to call it. This is modern warfare. This isn't warfare in ASL. ASL is by the squad, and most of the time, everything should be in squads. Okay, so uh, I'm going to propose some restrictions on this to get rid of this yuckiness. It ruins scenarios, it ruins the feel of the game. I don't like this half squad stuff going all over the place. And, I'm probably going to, if I find that players just can't seem to get rid of this addiction of half squatting everything they got, then I just don't want to play that scenario. It's not interesting to me. Um, what interests me is squad leader. Now, I know the original argument when they came out with half squads, the idea was, well, with a half squad, you lose a range, you lose your special abilities. Right. Okay. But if you're going to have sacrificial half squads, you don't care about those. You don't care about the loss of morale. You don't care about the loss of range. You don't care about any of that. You're just going out there to inhibit the defender from firing properly by creating a bunch of skirmishers. So I'm going to propose some adjustments to deployment. You're still going to be allowed to do it, but there are going to be penalties for failure. It's going to be harder to do it for free. I mean, there's no penalty right now. Right now, you take a task check, your 8-0 leader. Oh, dang, I failed. Okay, la 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 la. You still get to move. You still get to do everything you normally would. No, no, these guys should have been trained as half squads. They weren't trained as half squads. They trained as squads. So it should be a lot harder to deploy into half squads and use that kind of tactical flexibility. Now, one thing I did like in the Marines section where they allowed special elite units like 768 Marines to self-deploy and recombine. I think they can do it without limit or something, and they were operating more as teams. Okay, so that's fine, but it's just too easy right now to decide. Oh, I need. Normally, you could only get 10% half squads, but really, I need 30%. Well, I'll just do my task checks with my 9-1, my 9-2, and get a bunch of half squads running around out there. I say no, no to this nonsense. That's how I'll end the tape. Thanks for listening and watching. If you liked it, give me a thumb. If you didn't like it, thanks for watching all of this time. I appreciate my audience. Thank you very much for all the time you give to me. Cheers. See you next time. Bye.